The stars have never lied to you before. For 30 years, your calculations have guided the Sultan's armies to victory, predicted eclipses to the exact minute, mapped the heavens with divine precision. But tonight, as you trace the celestial patterns across your astrolabe, the mathematics reveal something that chills your blood. The Ottoman Empire has 3 years left to live. Welcome to another journey through the shadows of history, where we explore the moment when scientific truth collided with imperial loyalty. Close your eyes, settle back, and let me take you to 1577 Istanbul, where the greatest astronomer in the Ottoman Empire discovers that knowledge can be the most dangerous burden of all. Takiyüddin al-Rasid climbed the spiral stairs of his observatory as he had every night for the past 15 years. The tower atop Galata, rising above the Golden Horn, provided the perfect vantage point for studying the celestial sphere. Here, surrounded by astrolabes, armillary spheres, and calculation tables, he served as the Ottoman Empire's window into divine intention. The Sultan had built this observatory specifically for him after his successful prediction of the 1574 lunar eclipse that marked the beginning of the Persian campaign. "Build me a tower that reaches toward heaven," Sultan Murad III had commanded, "so that my astronomer may read God's will in the movement of stars." Tonight, the instruments that had brought him such honor felt like instruments of torture. The brass astrolabe in his hands, engraved with verses from the Quran and calibrated to track planetary motions with unprecedented accuracy, had just revealed the most devastating calculation of his career. Mars approaching conjunction with Saturn in the constellation of Scorpius, Mercury in retrograde motion, Jupiter entering the house of decline, Venus obscured by the approaching comet. Each celestial event, harmless in isolation, combined into a pattern that his mathematical models could interpret in only one way. The empire that had dominated 3 continents for nearly 3 centuries was entering its final phase. Takiyüddin set down his astrolabe with trembling hands and walked to the great window that looked out over Istanbul. Below him spread the greatest city in the world, the domes and minarets of hundreds of mosques, the bustling harbors filled with ships from every corner of the earth, the palaces and markets that testified to Ottoman power and prosperity. How could such magnificence be destined for destruction? The empire stretched from the gates of Vienna to the Indian Ocean, from the Crimean steppes to the North African coast. Its armies were the most feared in Europe. Its navy controlled the Mediterranean. Its diplomatic influence reached into every court on the continent. Yet the mathematics were inescapable. The same celestial mechanics that had allowed him to predict military victories and natural phenomena now pointed inexorably toward collapse. The planetary alignments followed laws as immutable as those governing the rise and fall of tides, the changing of seasons, the progression of day into night. Takiyüddin had spent decades studying these patterns, learning to read in stellar configurations the rise and fall of dynasties, the timing of plagues and famines, the ebb and flow of human fortune. His predictions had earned him wealth, status, and the Sultan's absolute trust. Now that same expertise condemned him to knowledge he wished he had never gained. The empire had 3 years. The conjunction would reach its peak in 1580, triggering events that would begin the long decline toward inevitable dissolution. He could see it all unfolding with the clarity of mathematical certainty. Military defeats, economic collapse, internal rebellions, the gradual erosion of territories that had taken centuries to conquer. As chief astronomer to the Sultan, Takiyüddin held a position of immense responsibility. His daily reports influenced military campaigns, guided diplomatic negotiations, and shaped policy decisions at the highest levels of government. The Sultan relied on his astronomical calculations to determine the most auspicious timing for important announcements, the best dates for beginning new construction projects, even the ideal moments for private audiences with foreign ambassadors. This trust had been built over decades of accurate predictions. Takiyüddin had successfully forecast the solar eclipse that terrified European armies during the Battle of Al-Khazarquivir. His calculations had identified the optimal launch date for the Cyprus campaign, ensuring Ottoman naval supremacy throughout the operation. His weather predictions had saved countless lives by warning of storms and natural disasters. Now that same trust placed him in an impossible position. The Sultan expected his regular astronomical report within hours, anticipating guidance for the upcoming Albanian campaign. How could he possibly deliver news that would shatter the foundation of imperial confidence? If he revealed his calculations honestly, the psychological impact could prove as devastating as the celestial events themselves. Knowledge of impending doom might trigger the very collapse his mathematics predicted, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that would make him responsible for the empire's destruction. But if he concealed the truth, he would betray the scientific principles that had guided his entire career. Worse, he would deny the Sultan the opportunity to prepare for what was coming, potentially making the eventual catastrophe even more severe. Takiyüddin's observatory contained one of the finest libraries in the Islamic world, with texts gathered from scholars across the empire and beyond. As he wrestled with his dilemma, he found himself studying the writings of predecessors who had faced similar conflicts between knowledge and loyalty. The great al-Kindi had warned the Abbasid caliphs of approaching difficulties based on astronomical calculations, only to be persecuted when his predictions proved inconveniently accurate. Omar Khayyam had coded his most dangerous observations in poetry, hiding mathematical truths beneath layers of metaphor and symbolism. Ptolemy himself had struggled with the political implications of astrological knowledge, writing extensively about the astronomer's duty to serve truth while avoiding the destruction that truth could bring to those who heard it. These historical examples provided little comfort. Each astronomer had found his own way to balance scientific integrity with political necessity, but none had faced circumstances quite like these. The Ottoman Empire was not merely another dynasty. It was the guardian of Islamic civilization, the protector of millions of believers, the last great Muslim power capable of standing against European expansion. The stakes had never been higher, and the margin for error had never been smaller. The mathematical models that revealed the empire's doom were based on centuries of astronomical observation and calculation. Islamic astronomers had long understood that celestial events influenced earthly affairs according to divine law, creating patterns that could be predicted and interpreted by those with sufficient knowledge and skill. The approaching conjunction represented the convergence of multiple cycles, the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that occurred every 20 years. The longer cycle of Mars that brought war and conflict, the eclipse cycle that marked periods of political transition, and the irregular appearance of comets that traditionally heralded the fall of kingdoms. Takiyüddin's innovation lay in his mathematical synthesis of these various cycles, creating predictive models of unprecedented accuracy and scope. Where earlier astronomers had focused on individual events, he had developed systems for analyzing the interaction between multiple celestial phenomena over extended periods. The calculations that doomed the empire represented the culmination of his life's work, the most sophisticated astronomical analysis ever attempted in the Islamic world. The precision of his mathematical methods left no room for doubt or wishful interpretation. The stars spoke with the voice of mathematical certainty. Yet this very precision created the astronomer's torment. Less accurate calculations might have provided room for hope, allowed him to qualify his predictions with uncertainty and doubt. Instead, his improved methods had eliminated ambiguity, leaving him with knowledge as sharp and cutting as a blade. Sultan Murad III had always shown deep respect for astronomical wisdom, viewing the study of celestial mechanics as a form of worship that revealed divine intention through mathematical harmony. He had invested enormous resources in Takiyüddin's observatory, importing the finest instruments from across the known world and supporting research that pushed the boundaries of Islamic science. This patronage reflected the Sultan's genuine belief that understanding heaven's movements provided crucial guidance for earthly governance. He saw no contradiction between religious faith and scientific inquiry, viewing astronomy as a means of better serving Allah by aligning human actions with cosmic design. Takiyüddin had always shared this perspective, finding in mathematical precision a pathway to spiritual understanding. The elegant equations that described planetary motion seemed to him prayers written in the language of numbers, expressions of divine order that transcended human comprehension. Now, however, he faced the possibility that divine order included the destruction of the empire that had nurtured and protected Islamic learning for centuries. If Allah's design truly encompassed the fall of the Ottoman state, what did that mean for the millions of believers who depended on it for protection and guidance? The theological implications were as troubling as the political ones. Was he witnessing divine judgment, cosmic inevitability, or simply the natural cycle that eventually claimed all earthly powers? Did the stars reveal God's will, or merely the mechanical unfolding of natural law? As dawn approached, Takiyüddin knew he could delay no longer. The Sultan would expect his astronomical report at the morning audience, and any deviation from established routine would raise questions he was not prepared to answer. Standing once more at his great window, watching the sun rise over the city that might be doomed, he considered his options with the same methodical precision he applied to celestial calculations. He could report his findings honestly, providing the Sultan with accurate information regardless of consequences. This approach honored scientific integrity and fulfilled his duty as imperial astronomer, but it risked triggering panic that could accelerate the very collapse he had predicted. Alternatively, he could modify his report, emphasizing positive aspects of the celestial configuration while downplaying the more ominous implications. This might preserve stability in the short term, but it would compromise his scientific principles and potentially leave the empire unprepared for future challenges. A third possibility involved resigning his position, claiming illness, or requesting permission to undertake a pilgrimage that would remove him from the court before the predicted events began to unfold. This would protect his scientific reputation while avoiding direct participation in either deception or catastrophe. Each option carried profound moral and practical implications that extended far beyond his personal welfare. The decision he made in the next few hours could influence the fate of millions of people across 3 continents. The morning audience with Sultan Murad III took place in the Hall of the Dome, a magnificent chamber whose architectural proportions reflected the mathematical harmony that Takiyüddin studied in celestial spheres. The Sultan sat upon his golden throne, surrounded by viziers, generals, and court officials who looked to the astronomer for guidance on matters ranging from military strategy to economic policy. "My faithful Takiyüddin," the Sultan's voice carried across the marble floor with quiet authority. "What wisdom do the stars offer for our coming campaign in Albania? When do the heavens favor our departure?" The assembled court fell silent, waiting for the astronomical guidance that would shape their empire's immediate future. Takiyüddin felt the weight of every eye upon him, the pressure of expectations built over decades of successful predictions. In that moment of absolute scrutiny, he made his choice. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his heart, "the celestial signs counsel caution. Mars approaches a powerful conjunction that traditionally marks periods of significant change. I recommend delaying the Albanian campaign until after the winter months, when the planetary influences will be more favorable." It was not a lie, precisely, but it was far from the complete truth. The significant change he mentioned could indeed encompass the military setbacks that would mark the beginning of imperial decline. By recommending delay, he might postpone the first in a series of defeats that would eventually fulfill his mathematical prophecy. The Sultan nodded thoughtfully. And what of the approaching comet that our observers have detected? What significance do you attach to its appearance? This question struck closer to the heart of Takiyüddin's dilemma. The comet was indeed a key element in his calculations, its orbit precisely timed to coincide with the other celestial events that spelled doom for the empire. "The comet, Your Majesty, represents a sign of divine attention," Takiyüddin replied carefully. "Its appearance indicates that Allah is preparing significant changes in the order of earthly affairs. Such changes can bring either great fortune or great trials, depending on how mortals respond to heaven's guidance." This interpretation allowed him to remain truthful while avoiding the specific details that would cause panic. The significant changes could indeed include the empire's decline, but they might also encompass renewal and reform if appropriate actions were taken. The Sultan leaned forward with interest. "What actions does heaven counsel to ensure that these changes bring fortune rather than trials?" The question offered Takiyüddin an unexpected opportunity. Perhaps the purpose of his terrible knowledge was not to passively witness the empire's doom, but to help guide it away from the destructive path his calculations had revealed. "The stars counsel 3 primary actions, Your Majesty. First, strengthening the bonds of justice and righteousness that connect the throne to its subjects. Second, careful attention to the empire's financial health, ensuring that resources are preserved for future challenges. Third, diplomatic wisdom that avoids unnecessary conflicts while maintaining the empire's honor and security." These recommendations, while derived from his astronomical analysis, represented sound governmental principles that could indeed help the empire weather approaching difficulties. If implemented effectively, they might not prevent the cosmic influences he had detected, but they could minimize their impact and perhaps extend the timeline beyond his 3-year prediction. In the days following his audience with the Sultan, Takiyüddin found himself haunted by the weight of his secret knowledge. Every aspect of daily life in Istanbul took on new significance when viewed through the lens of impending doom. The bustling markets, the construction of new buildings, the laughter of children playing in palace gardens, all seemed tinged with tragic irony. He began to notice signs that supported his astronomical calculations. Reports of financial strain in distant provinces, complaints about corruption among local governors, murmurs of discontent from janissary commanders who felt their traditional privileges were being eroded. None of these problems seemed immediately threatening, but Takiyüddin's enhanced awareness allowed him to see patterns that others missed. The Albanian campaign, delayed on his recommendation, faced unexpected logistical difficulties that validated his counsel of caution. A planned naval expedition was postponed due to storms that his weather calculations had predicted. Several diplomatic negotiations proceeded more smoothly because the timing had been adjusted according to his astronomical advice. These small successes provided some comfort, suggesting that his knowledge could indeed be used constructively rather than simply as a burden to bear in isolation. Perhaps the purpose of prophecy was not to paralyze with fear, but to enable preparation and adaptation. Takiyüddin's position in the Ottoman intellectual community connected him with scholars throughout the Islamic world and beyond. Through correspondence with astronomers in Samarkand, Cairo, and Cordoba, he began to explore whether his calculations might be verified or challenged by independent analysis. The responses to his carefully worded inquiries proved both troubling and enlightening. Several astronomers had detected unusual celestial activity consistent with his observations, though none had attempted the comprehensive analysis that had revealed the full scope of approaching changes. A particularly insightful letter from Ibn Majid in Alexandria confirmed many of Takiyüddin's mathematical conclusions while offering a different interpretation of their significance. Rather than viewing the approaching conjunction as marking the end of the Ottoman Empire, Ibn Majid suggested it might herald a fundamental transformation that would ultimately strengthen Islamic civilization. This alternative perspective provided Takiyüddin with new hope and a different framework for understanding his calculations. Perhaps what he had interpreted as terminal decline was actually cosmic preparation for renewal and rebirth. The mathematical patterns that seemed to predict doom might instead indicate the clearing away of obsolete structures to make room for new growth. This reinterpretation did not invalidate his calculations, but it offered a more constructive way to understand their implications and develop appropriate responses. As months passed, Takiyüddin watched carefully for signs that would confirm or challenge his astronomical predictions. The delayed Albanian campaign eventually proceeded, but with mixed results that suggested the cosmic influences he had detected were indeed beginning to manifest. Economic reports from various provinces indicated growing financial strain, confirming his calculations about the empire's material foundations. Several diplomatic initiatives encountered unexpected complications, reflecting the celestial patterns that traditionally accompanied periods of political transition. Most significantly, the Sultan himself began to display the psychological effects that Takiyüddin's analysis had suggested would accompany the approaching conjunction. Increased suspicion of subordinates, difficulty making decisive policy choices, and a growing preoccupation with potential threats all reflected the cosmic influences that were reshaping the empire's leadership. These confirmations of his astronomical models provided validation for Takiyüddin's scientific methods while deepening his concern about future developments. The patterns were unfolding exactly as his calculations had predicted, suggesting that the more dramatic changes lay ahead. 2 years after his initial calculation, Takiyüddin faced the moment he had dreaded. The celestial conjunction was approaching its peak, and the cosmic influences that had been building gradually were about to reach critical intensity. His mathematical models indicated that the next few months would bring the decisive events that would either confirm or disprove his predictions. The decision he faced was whether to remain silent and allow events to unfold naturally, or to make one final attempt to warn the empire of what was coming. His earlier strategy of providing subtle guidance had achieved some success, but it had not addressed the fundamental cosmic forces that threatened the Ottoman state. After weeks of agonizing consideration, Takiyüddin chose to prepare a comprehensive report that would lay out his complete analysis for the Sultan's consideration. This document would represent his most precise and detailed prediction, offering the empire's leadership full knowledge of what his calculations revealed about their future. The report took months to prepare, combining mathematical precision with diplomatic sensitivity. He presented his astronomical findings as objectively as possible, while offering practical recommendations for responding to the challenges ahead. The reception of Takiyüddin's final report exceeded his worst fears. Rather than considering his astronomical analysis as scientific information deserving careful evaluation, court officials interpreted it as evidence of disloyalty or madness. The idea that the mighty Ottoman Empire could face serious decline seemed so preposterous that the messenger was blamed for the message. Within days of submitting his report, Takiyüddin found himself stripped of his position and confined to his quarters pending further investigation. The observatory that had been his life's work was declared closed, its instruments sealed away from the astronomer who had used them to such devastating effect. The irony was profound. The same mathematical precision that had earned him decades of respect and authority now marked him as dangerous to imperial security. The knowledge that could have helped the empire prepare for coming challenges was rejected as treasonous speculation. Yet, even in disgrace, Takiyüddin found a form of peace. He had fulfilled his duty as both scientist and loyal subject by providing the most accurate information possible about future challenges. Whether that information was used constructively or ignored entirely was beyond his control. History would eventually vindicate Takiyüddin's astronomical calculations with terrible precision. The long decline of the Ottoman Empire began exactly when his mathematical models had predicted, following patterns that matched his analysis with uncanny accuracy. The failure of subsequent military campaigns, the gradual loss of territorial control, the internal rebellions and economic crises that marked the empire's slow collapse, all unfolded according to the cosmic timetable he had discovered in stellar configurations. But history would also reveal the deeper wisdom embedded in his final report. The recommendations he had offered for responding to celestial influences while rejected by his contemporaries provided a roadmap for adaptation that later generations would rediscover and implement. The Ottoman Empire did not disappear in 3 years as his calculations had suggested. Instead, it underwent the fundamental transformation that other astronomers had predicted, evolving into new forms that preserved essential elements of Islamic civilization while adapting to changed cosmic conditions. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, perhaps you'll consider the burden carried by those who see too clearly into the future. Takiyüddin's story reminds us that knowledge without wisdom can be a curse, but wisdom without courage to act on knowledge serves no purpose. The astronomer who calculated his empire's doom discovered that truth alone is not enough. It must be coupled with the skill to communicate effectively, the wisdom to interpret correctly, and the courage to persist despite rejection and persecution. His mathematical precision revealed cosmic patterns that transcended human intention, showing how even the mightiest empires exist within cycles larger than their founders could imagine. Yet his human compassion taught him that these patterns need not be accepted passively. They could be understood, prepared for, and perhaps even influenced through appropriate action. Sleep well, knowing that throughout history, dedicated observers have watched the skies for signs and portents, seeking to understand humanity's place within cosmic design. In their patient calculations and careful observations, we find both humility before forces beyond our control and hope that knowledge, wisely applied, can help us navigate even the most challenging celestial influences. The stars reveal destiny, but human wisdom determines how that destiny unfolds.